The birth and development of European colonialism or imperialism in Nusantara. The colonial era begins in the 16th century. Successive waves of Europeans, or the Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, and British, sought to dominate the spice trade at its sources in India and the Spice Island, or Maluku of Indonesia. These meant finding a way to Asia to cut out Muslim merchants who, with their Venetian outlet in the Mediterranean, monopolized spice import to Europe. Astronomically priced at the time, spices were highly coveted not only to preserve and make poorly preserved meat palatable, but also as medicines and magic potions. The arrival of Europeans in Southeast Asia is often regarded as the watershed moment in its history. Other scholars consider this view untenable, arguing that European influence during the times of the early arrivals of the 16th and 17th centuries was limited in both area and depth. This is in part due to Europe not being the most advanced or dynamic area of the world in the early 15th century. Rather, the major expansionist force of this time was Islam. In 1453, for example, the Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople, while Islam continued to spread through Indonesia and the Philippines. European influence, particularly that of the Dutch, would not have its greatest impact on Indonesia until the 18th and 19th centuries. The Portuguese. Newfound Portuguese expertise in navigation, shipbuilding, and weaponry allowed them to make daring expeditions of exploration and expansion. Starting with the first exploratory expedition sent from newly conquered Malacca in 1512, the Portuguese were the first Europeans to arrive in Indonesia and sought to dominate the sources of valuable spices and to extend the Catholic Church's missionary effort. The Portuguese turned east to Maluku, and through both military conquest and alliance with local rulers, they established trading posts, forts, and missions on the island of Ternate, Ambon, and Solor, among others. The height of Portuguese missionary activities, however, came into the latter half of the 16th century. Ultimately, the Portuguese presence in Indonesia was reduced to Solor, Flores, and Timor in modern-day Nusa Tenggara. Following defeat at the hands of indigenous Ternateans and the Dutch in Maluku, and a general failure to maintain control of the trade in the region, in comparison with the original Portuguese ambition to dominate Asian trade, their influence on Indonesia culture was small. The romantic keroncong guitar ballads, a number of Indonesian words which reflects Portuguese role as the lingua franca of the archipelago, alongside Malay, and many family names in eastern Indonesia, such as Da Costa, Diaz, De Frances Gonçalves, and etc. The most significant impacts of the Portuguese arrival were the disruption and disorganization of the trade networks, mostly as a result of their conquest of Malacca, and the first significant planting of Christianity in Indonesia. There have continued to be Christian communities in eastern Indonesia through the present, which has contributed to a sense of shared interest with Europeans, particularly among the Ambonese. Dutch East India Company. In 1602, the Dutch Parliament awarded the VOC a monopoly on trade and colonial activities in the region at a time before the company controlled any territory in Java. In 1619, the VOC conquered the West Javan city of Jayakarta, where they founded the city of Batavia, or present-day Jakarta. The VOC became deeply involved in the internal politics of Java in this period, and fought in a number of wars involving the leaders of Mataram and Banten. The Dutch followed the Portuguese aspirations, courage, brutality, and strategies, but brought better organizations, weapons, ships, and superior financial backing. Although they failed to gain complete control of the Indonesian spice trade, they had much more success than the previous Portuguese efforts. They exploited the factionalization of the small kingdom in Java that had replaced Majapahit, establishing a permanent foothold in Java, from which grew a land-based colonial empire which became one of the richest colonial possessions on earth. By the mid-17th century, Batavia, or the headquarters of VOC in Asia, had become an important royal center in the region. It had repelled attacks from the Javanese Mataram kingdom. In 1641, the Dutch captured Malacca from the Portuguese, thus weakened Portuguese position in Asia. The Dutch defeated the Sulawesi city of Makassar in 1667, thus bringing its trade under VOC control. Sumatran ports were also brought under VOC control, and the last of the Portuguese were expelled in 1660. In return for monopoly control over the paper trade and the expulsion of the British, the Dutch helped the son of the ruler of the Banten to overthrow his father in 1680. By the 18th century, the VOC had established themselves firmly in the Indonesian archipelago, controlling inter-island trade as a part of their Asian business, which includes India, Ceylon, Formosa, and Japan. VOC has established their important base in some ports in Java, Maluku, and parts of Sulawesi, Sumatra, and Malay Peninsula. French and British interlude. After the fall of Netherlands to the First French Empire and the dissolution of the Dutch East India Company in 1800, there were profound changes in the European colonial administration of the East Indies. The company assets in East Indies were nationalized as the Dutch colony. The Dutch of East Indies. Meanwhile, Europe was devastated by the Napoleonic War. In the Netherlands, Napoleon Bonaparte in 1806 oversaw the dissolution of the Batavian Republic, which was replaced by the Kingdom of Holland, a French puppet kingdom ruled by Napoleon's third brother, Louis Bonaparte. The East Indies were treated as a proxy French colony, administered through a Dutch intermediary. In 1806, King Louis of the Netherlands sent one of his generals, Herman Willem Daendels, to serve as a Governor-General of the East Indies, based in Java. Daendels was sent to strengthen Javanese defense against a predicted British invasion. Since 1685, the British has had a presence in Bencholen on the western coast of Sumatra, as well as several posts north of the Malaccan Strait. Daendels was responsible for the construction of the Great Post Road, or in Indonesia, Jalan Raya Pos, across northern Java from Anjer to Panorewacan. The 1,000-kilometer road was meant as to ease logistics across Java and was completed in only 1 year, during which thousands of Javanese forced laborers died. In 1811, Java fell to a British East India Company force under Baron Minto, the Governor-General of India. Lord Minto appointed Sir Thomas Stamford Raffles as the Lieutenant Governor of Java. Raffles carried further the administrative centralization previously initiated by Daendels. Raffles launched some military expeditions against local princes to subjugate them into British rule, such as the assault of Yogyakarta Kraton in 21 June 1812 and the military expedition against Sultan Mahmud Baharudin II of Palembang, and seized the nearby Bangka Island. During his administration, number of ancient monuments in Java were rediscovered, excavated, and systematically catalogued for the first time. The most important one in the rediscovery of Borobudur Buddhist temple in central Java. Raffles was an enthusiast of the island's history, as he wrote the book History of Java, published later in 1817. In 1815, the island took control of the Netherlands following the end of Napoleonic Wars, under the terms of the Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1814. Dutch state rule. After the VOC was dissolved in 18,000 following bankruptcy, and after a short British rule under Thomas Stamford Raffles, the Dutch state took over the VOC possession in 1816. A Javanese uprising was crushed in the Java War of 1825 until 1830. After 1830, a system of forced cultivation and indentured labor was introduced on Java. This system brought the Dutch and their Indonesian allies enormous wealth. The cultivation system tied peasants to their lands, forcing them to work in government-owned plantations for 60 days of the year. The system was abolished in a more liberal period after 1870. In 1901, the Dutch adopted what they called the ethical policy, which included somewhat increased investment in indigenous action and modest political reforms. So, the Dutch colonial formed a privileged upper social class of soldiers, administrators, managers, teachers, and pioneers. They lived together with the natives, but at the top of a rigid social and racial caste system, Dutch East Indies had two legal classes of citizens, European and indigenous. A third class, foreign Easterners, was added in 1920. Upgrading the infrastructure of ports and roads was a high priority for the Dutch, with the goal of modernizing the economy, pumping wages into local areas, facilitating commerce, and speeding up military movement. By 1950, Dutch engineers had built and upgraded a road network with 12,000 km of asphalted surface, 41,000 km of metal road areas, 16,000 km of gravel surfaces. In addition, the Dutch built 7,500 kilometers of railways, bridge, irrigation system covering 1.4 million hectares of rice field, several harbors, and 140 public drinking water systems. These Dutch constructed public works became the economic base of the colonial state. After independence, they became the basis of the Indonesian infrastructure. For most of the colonial period, Dutch control over its territories in the Indonesian archipelago was tenuous. In some cases, Dutch police and military action in parts of Indonesia were quite cruel. Recent discussion, for example, of Dutch cruelty in Aceh have encouraged renewed research on this aspect of Dutch rule. It was only in the early 20th century, 3 centuries after the first Dutch trading post, that the full extent of the colonial territory was established and direct colonial rule exerted across what would become the boundaries of the modern Indonesian state. Portuguese Timor, now East Timor, remained under Portuguese rule until 1975 when it was invaded by Indonesia. The Indonesia government declared the territory of Indonesia province but relinquished it in 1999. So in conclusion, Europeans such as the Portuguese arrived in Indonesia from the 16th century seeking to monopolize the sources of valuable nutmeg, cloves, and cube paper in Maluku. In 1602, the Dutch established the Dutch East India Company and became the dominant European power by 1610. Following bankruptcy, the VOC was formally dissolved in 1800, and the government of the Netherlands established the Dutch East Indies under government control. By the early 20th century, Dutch dominance extended to the current boundaries. Thank you.